government bans cash tax collection and roadblock enforcement in informal sector. Executive Secretary, Joint Revenue Board Olusegun Adeshokan says new framework aims to eliminate coercive and fragmented tax practices, especially at subnational level. According to him, guidelines will establish uniform tax structure for state and local governments, integrating informal businesses into formal economy via centralized tax ID platform. To talk this through is the partner joining us in the studio is Oladejo Adeyemi, who is a partner at Anderson, Nigeria. Thank you so much for joining us on TVC Breakfast. I always love it whenever you join us, talking about tax because, sometimes it can be very, very complicated for people to understand, but you help us, break it down to the brass tacks. So looking at what the federal government is talking about, the 1% presumptive tax on the turnover of certain informal sector businesses, there are so many questions that have been asked, roadblocks, etc. Could you help us, demystify this, help us understand it? What exactly is the significance of this new policy direction?
Okay, thanks, Ibrahim, for having me, and thanks for that question. If, as a practitioner, this is a very good step in a very positive direction, and I will say why. Before now, the taxation of the informal sector has been a challenge. Attempt had been to force the informal sector into the same regime that had existed for all manners of companies. And if you understand that sector very well, you will know that it's a peculiar sector. You have a lot of people that have challenge. You have a lot of businesses that are challenged with inability to keep records. Some people don't even know how much they make. So wanting that sector to be taxed exactly as a structured sector wasn't good for our taxing regime. Now, at the onset of the reform, there are certain provisions that require certain regulations that should then be promulgated. So one of the regulations is this, which is pursuant to Section 29 of the Nigeria Tax Act. And the Act says, where you have businesses or individuals that for whatever reason, that provision says, if their income cannot be easily determinable, it's impracticable to determine their income, such individual will fall under this presumptive tax regime. This regulation is then saying the mannerism of taxing such entity or individual operating within that informal sector would be 1% of the turnover. And it doesn't stop there. It then further says, we recognize that you may be nano or micro business, in which case you are making revenue of less than 12 million in a whole year. If that is the case, even under this regime, this presumptive tax regime, you are exempted. So it's a way to bring some form of structure to how the informal sector will be taxed, such that the expectations are clear from the citizen part. The arbitrariness that you see tax authorities, just display is reduced, and then you also see JRB, which is the Joint Revenue Board, then living up to its responsibility of providing that framework that would assist all the 37 IRSs, including the NRS, to be able to dispense taxing provision appropriately.
Let's say apologies as you come in. I really want to understand, that particular aspect of, because when you mention people like the informal sectors, the artisans, those people that sell things, they do not have proper financial record, as you said.
Correct.
So, from your perspective, does this simplified approach make taxation, fairer and easier for traders and artisans, or could it just create, that confusion about how liability is determined?
If you ask me, this is a fairer regime, and I'll tell you why. First, you know that as long as I am within this sector, I am sure, I'm certain that my tax will be 1% of my revenue.
Regardless,
if I am within this sector. Now, if you feel you are unfairly taxed at 1%, because the informal sector is supposed to be transitional. No business should start, except this, for a situation that we've seen in Nigeria, where you see people in big markets, Balogun markets, they can take 100 trailer loads of goods, and they'll keep telling you, I'm a player within the informal sector. I don't have I don't have so much with me. Now, you're not supposed to be within the sector forever. Your business is not supposed to be unstructured forever. It starts in an unstructured manner. As you continue to grow, you then gravitate towards a structured manner where you are able to comply. Then remember, if you are talking about a business that is limited liability company, remember that the taxing rate, the tax rate for that is even 0%. So if you say the 1% is unfair being a player within the informal sector, and you are a limited liability company, then you move to the formal sector. The whole idea of this is we cannot continue to have a population of business and people that remain unaccounted for, So the president has said, oh, our GDP is going to grow to $1 trillion by 2030. The question is how? You have to have increased participation within the net. Now, this is what that is trying to bring up.
So, two things.
Yeah.
Number one, I am a non-formal business operator who is still unstructured. And I hear that the government wants to do this now. Now, before now, possibly, some boys just walk into my shop and drop one ticket. And I get to pay for whatever amount, that happens probably every day. So with the introduction of this now, what does that mean to me and those boys who walk in with the ticket? That's on one part. On the other hand, and how does this then benefit citizens in the long run who eventually walk into my same unstructured shop, economic matters now, and buy goods with me? Will it mean that I will have to add more cost to what they are buying, which at the end of the day still affects them? Can we explain all that?
Okay, so let me start from the first part, Nelson. Fantastic question there. The first part, what happens to those people that would show up, the non-state actors and all that? The minister had to mention, while this signing was going on, that this will put a stop to roadblocks, whatever coercive mannerism of collecting cash-based tax in the past. So now we have something saying you don't have any authorization of the government to operate. They will come and say, oh, we are from local government, we are from this, we are representing. Now, as a trader, as a business owner, you now have the legitimacy to say, I can't pay anything to you. Now, because we are Nigerians and we should be realistic, I do not personally expect that they will fizzle out overnight. It's not going to be magical, right? Because say what you like, people had printed revenue receipts.
And for 2026,
that
they
will
must
cover,
utilize it.
exactly, that will cover the whole of 2026.
Yeah.
But we are talking about government here. With the might that this administration has shown over the period, you know that as the administration continues to come out hard on non-state actors and continue to find relevance for them in other sector or subsector of the economy, you would see that the interest to keep pursuing what the law as flagrantly says is inappropriate to do would be relaxed. So on that hand, for a business owner, you now have the legitimacy to say, I know what tax I'm going to pay. I know who I'm going to pay the tax to. In fact, I know that it's going to be 1% of my revenue. So I'm not going to pay anything to
That
you.
language then has to then go down to state governors who would have to, structure that with the local government so that does not continue any further.
And that is the domestication part of the exercise. And that's why you see the NTPIC, the National Tax, the Implementation Committee headed by Joseph Tegbe, working with the minister, working with the JRT, working with all of the sector, NRS, to ensure that there is harmony. Because what you are saying there is, whatever has been promulgated, whatever regulation has been signed, how do we ensure that it is felt on the street?
Yeah.
That would require collaboration of all of those stakeholders. And I can tell you that that is going on. Earlier this year, I attended a meeting in Abuja where the Implementation Committee was reeling out what the plans would be. These are the things. The issuance of this regulation, for instance, didn't just come. Practitioners that were close to those sources knew that regulations will be reeled out. So on that aspect, the trader or the business owner now knows what the expectation is. The non-state actors also know. And they will have to find relevance in other subsector of the economy. That is on the one hand. Now, on the other hand of how does this benefit citizens? You see, nothing excites anyone as clarity.
Yeah.
The fact that you now know that it's going to be 1%. You now know that if your revenue is even less than 12 million naira, which is about $1 million per month, you've got nothing to pay, even under the presumptive tax regime. That's it.
I think it's 50 million naira and below.
No. That's even for the regular, that's for the conventional, the formal regime. Now, I'm saying even under the presumptive tax regime that is guided by that section 29 of the Nigeria Tax Act, you still have exemption there, So if all I've had for a year is 5 million revenue and someone is saying, where's your tax? I can then say, I've got no tax to pay. I'm exempted even under this regime. So that clarity brings satisfaction to the soul of a business owner. He wants to grow. And as you are growing, you can also then say, when I grow beyond this stage, this is what happened to me. Remember, we have the 100 million bits. When you then enter into the above 100 million and you're a business, then you know that you have to start paying tax at 30%. So that clarity for me is a heightened level of incentive.
I don't know whether you will see it from the way some people would look at it. For instance, when you look at the issue of exemption threshold and then turnover-based tax, it's quite clear that majority of even the people in the informal sector will not be affected at all. It's quite clear. It's probably about those who are doing so well in the informal sector, not willing to pay any tax, being brought in to pay tax. Because most informal people working in the informal sector will not hand up to 10 million naira a year, and therefore they are not going to be affected. The threshold is 12 million. And then when you look at the issue of the turnover-based tax, is only 1% above. If you hand more than that 12 million revenue, you only pay 1% above. And therefore, so many vulnerable people in the informal sectors will not be affected. They have nothing to worry about. It's those big players who are selling, having a turnover of 100, 200 million naira in Akwagon, selling clothes and all that, that will be affected. So there is no way the poor people will be affected in this case, or people earning low money from trading. Now, the other side of it is also, like some people will argue, that if you look at the issue of what this tax regime has done, like you said the last time you were here, is to unify, the entire tax system in a way that we won't have multiple taxation. I remember you said that.
Absolutely.
Once. Okay. Now, it means those people making life difficult for the people collecting taxes on the road, will now have to leave those places. They are the ones costing the cost of logistics to go up, apart from the increase in the cost of fuel. And that will be good news for many people, not only for people in the oil business, but also for you and I, because the cost of bringing will actually trickle down. You will see the trickle-down effect in prices. Since the cost of logistics will come down.
Absolutely.
Then we also know that it will change, some will say it will change the nature of tax collection at the local government level and state level. I don't know whether I've had the argument that you've hinted at that issue shortly here. That they have printed revenue receipts. You have all these informal tax collectors, I'll call them, because many people tend to condemn the National Union of Road Transport Workers and all that. Oh, they are creating nuisance, menace on the street. But in reality, I spoke to some of them to try and find out what was actually going on. I was told that, look, do you know that we have paid in advance? We pay quarterly in advance to the state government. So they have the receipts to cover the money. And that is why you see the aggression, the chase vehicle and all that. Even in some cases causing accidents.
Absolutely.
So I'm sure that with your explanation, those will no longer be necessary. Like you said again, the devil is in the implementation, whether it will happen now or in a year's time, until those revenue receipts are fully sold out.
Okay, so
I don't know whether you will agree with those
you see, I agree with you substantially. But the interesting thing is, Nigeria is not the only jurisdiction that is beginning to use this. Jurisdiction like India, Indonesia, Brazil, even South Africa here, they've been using this presumptive tax, of course, at different rates, and all of that. And the beauty of it is that, remember, it's also not working alone. There are other provisions that have been implemented, in terms of necessity of registration. Now you cannot operate a bank account without having a tax ID, and all of that. So the leverage on technology would also help the government to be able to penetrate. But realistically, I do not expect that the non-state actor will disappear overnight. But I am trusting that with the might that this government has shown in other bigger policy issues like the fuel subsidy, and the unification of the rate and all of that, when you see that same might displayed here, the issue of the non-state actors' appearance would not be anything that we should bother about, But overall, I feel this is a very positive initiative. That the fact that you also see exclusion even within the regulation in terms of the 12 million tells you what the heart of the administration is. If you are poor, let's not belabor you even more. So some people will say, oh, tax all of everybody, let it be everybody. But you see, now you say 12 million, and you've said that a lot of people will fall within that category. So rather than just revenue seeking, I think it is first getting people into the net. When that happens, then we can start talking about the appropriateness of the rates that should apply to you.
While it is quite laudable that the government is thinking about those who are not, they have not, largely as against the haves. Critics are actually arguing, regarding the turnover, which can be problematic because of the businesses might, have large sales. For instance, you might have something worth of maybe 5 million to 12 million, or even 20 million goods. And then your profit margin might just be less than £1 million, depending on how much sales you make. So that borders on transparency. Do you think people will be willing to inform the government, the tax collectors, so to speak, as to how much they've made in terms of profit margin? Or do you think that there is a risk that a turnover-based tax might unintentionally punish low-margin businesses?
You see, two things, you can have two truths coexist. The reason the rate is 1%, when you look at some other jurisdictions, you have much more than that. The reason the rate is 1% is, I believe, is a recognition of the peculiarities that we've had as a nation.
Like at all.
Exactly. So at 1%, I don't want to, I can't
you should be able to
specify
at least
what your margin is. I can't determine what your margin is, But I believe at 1%, it should not be overly burdensome for you. Now, in terms of disclosure, correctness of your disclosure, remember that you have technology. We are leveraging technology. The nation just signed MOU with a nation like France, on tax-related matters. And technology is being deployed. You are having e-invoicing initiative where government is saying businesses should be transmitting their invoices through a particular platform that is government-owned and government-controlled. I want to be a party to it. So the news is actually getting tightened. So it will no longer be left to what you say. We can now analyze your bank account. We can analyze your transactions, your lifestyle. You can't say it was a bad year and you traveled with your family 3 times within the year and you say you didn't end up to 12 million. So the question is, where did those funds, where did they come from? So the issue of the accuracy of your income is not only going to be left to your exclusive preserve. The government will now also say, based on the data information, you're going to have exchange of data across board from different countries, even across the IRSs. Based on the data available to us, this is what you have said is not accurate. And based on that, you would have to then weigh the cost of having to pay 1% on your revenue, because at 1%, then also remember, withholding tax regulation also came into being that reduced the rates of general goods and service, supply of goods and services from 5% to 2%. Still on this issue of margin, recognizing that you may not even be making as much. Why should somebody be deducting as high as 5% from you, which might even be your entire margin? So I feel there is this sense of, we know where we are coming from. We know where we are, that the administration is pushing out to say, yes, things are not perfect, but let us start moving towards how things can be better from where we are.
Yeah, so let's bring the states into the conversation again. This is a federal government-led policy that is going to be domesticated in all the states. So where then does the state government come in terms of generating their own revenue? Because again, remember, it's the same persons, both the federal and the state go to for this. And if the federal government is removing all of those roadblocks as to allowing some of these officials at the state level to do what they used to do, what then happens to them?
Let me tell you what has happened. First, the states are participating through the Joint Revenue Board. Remember that you have the 37 IRSs, including the FCT IRS.
Yeah.
Then you have the Joint Revenue Board, which used to be the previous JTB, Joint Tax Board. Now, all of the IRSs are representing the states. So in fact, this regulation, the law says it is on the advice of the JRB that the minister will issue the regulation. So what that means is that there must have been some consultation, there must have been concurrence. All parties must say, we agree with this framework, then let's push it.
So the reason why I'm asking that question is so that the person who is watching now can begin to have an implanted understanding.
I would get there. Now, what has also happened in other parts of the provision of the larger reform is, when you mentioned VAT the other time, when you were analyzing one of the papers, the structure to share, the sharing formula for VAT has been revised. Better, tilting better towards the states. The FG's portion has reduced compared to what the FG used to get in the old regime, right? The participation of states, population, equality, all of those things have now even been put into consideration to arrive at the percentage that a state will take home. So if you participate more, if you had consumed more from your state, you would get more. If you are a more popular state, that would impact what you are going to get. If then there is a threshold that we are all just going to share equally. So the states cannot say, the national is just forcing these initiatives down our throats. They were party to all of these things before we got to this place. So I feel there is a fair level of representation across board that should make domestication quite easy, and no party should be disenfranchised by reason of their view not being taken into cognizance.
Absolutely. Mr. Shaw,
domestication and implementation.
I'm just wondering, for those watching, will be interested in saying, look, Nigeria is not perfect. We know the situation we are in. Well, supposing the tax officer said, look, assess my income based on my account as having a turnover of 100 million naira, when in reality there's other funds that come in, not through trading activities. How would I deal with this? Would I be able to go to a tax tribunal, to challenge the findings that these are other sources of revenue, which may not necessarily belong to me one way or the other?
Okay, so there's a provision. This reform is quite comprehensive, and it's unfortunate that we don't have as much time. There's a provision in the tax law that has recently been introduced. Provision to have tax ombudsman. Is also not peculiar to Nigeria, right? The provision is saying that there's an office of the ombudsman. If any taxpayer disagrees with the view of the tax administrator, you can go to the ombudsman, the office of the ombudsman, to assist you in providing that explanation that we exonerate you or show that you don't have anything. So you're not left alone at all. Then also remember that our assessment is based on self-assessment. Our taxing regime is based on self-assessment. You are the one that will say, this is what I've made and this is what my tax is. What this regulation has brought to bear is you are now clear on how things will work. And we are going to see more and more framework and more regulation pursuant to all of these tax laws, from all of the quarters next
Absolutely.
time.
Thank you so much for making sense of this. It's quite, it looks so complicated, but then you made it you simplified it. And I believe that everyone would probably understand what is coming and that the government is for them and not against them.
Thank you.
You explained it in a layman's language.
That's right.
That's what we wanted
to do.
Thank
Mr. Oladejo Adeyemi is a partner at Anderson, Nigeria. Thank you so much for your keenness of insight. Thank you.
Thank you for coming this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Now, still to come on TVC Breakfast, we'll examine how the Israel-Iran war is pushing oil prices up, affecting fuel costs and shaking global markets. What does this mean for energy security and economies worldwide?